I originally started off in my first term trying to handwrite. I gave up on that very quickly. I'm sure it still works for some people in university, but for me, it just felt very time consuming and my handwriting is awful. So I transitioned to an app called Notion, which I know quite a lot of people in high school now might use as well. But the way that I use it is I've always taken notes in a way where I turn them into toggle lists, which is basically just a fancy way of saying whenever I'm reading through a lecture slide, I will turn it into a question. So if I'm reading something about, I don't know, people's decision making, I'll write a question, how do people make decisions? And that gives me a really nice resource to look at later instead of just passively reading through the notes. I'm always trying to self-test myself. So it really helps me when exams come up to be like, okay, what do I really need to work on? So that's been the system I've been using for the past 3 years, and I find that it's been really effective for exams. But another thing as well is it's not particularly time consuming as well. For me, that's a nice balance of not having to spend hours and hours and hours handwriting notes or summarizing things. I've really liked that balance between, studying a bit smarter rather than studying harder, and that's the way I've gone about my note taking in uni. I'm in high school, I definitely took down my notes digitally most of the time too, but I would just write down the notes and leave them there and then sort of gloss over them later. And I'm sure being in year 12 at the moment, you probably hear your teachers harp on about do trial exams all the time. And sometimes it can feel a bit like a lot of effort or it's just a bit too much. But towards the end of before I sat my HSC, I started actually sitting a lot of trial exams and I realized why they harp on about it so much, because testing yourself or asking yourself questions is just the best way to make sure that you understand things. So that's been the biggest thing for me, instead of just trying to summarize or passively writing things down, really making sure that as I'm going through things, I'm asking myself lots of questions to make sure that I properly understand what's going on. When do I use these various note-taking strategies? I'd say it'd probably vary for every single degree, but for me, it's primarily in lectures. So when they're covering the content and walking you through it. In tutorials for my course, it's often based on slides and telling you how to go about the assignment. So it's not as essential to be taking notes because that's sort of separate to the final exam. The other place where I take notes is when I'm looking through an assignment and sort of getting my head around it. I'll often write down my thoughts as I'm going through it or trying to summarize things. So it's a bit more approachable for me to get stuck into it instead of this giant intimidating assignment sheet. So I'd say the two main places for me is throughout lectures and when I'm actually starting to work on an assignment and reading through it.
So in my first year, my note-taking ability was pretty bad, I'm not gonna lie. I was basically just writing down every single thing that I saw on my lecture slides. I wouldn't even watch the lecture, I would just go straight to the lecture slides and I would write down basically everything on each slide. And I'm sure that would be very helpful for like visual, like tactile learners who can just write down everything and they'll like memorize it. But for me, I'm a very auditory and visual learner. So for me, more diagrams and short, succinct notes would actually be very helpful for me. And that's what I'm doing right now in my second year. But in my first year, I was doing basically the opposite and it did not work out well for me. So my note-taking strategies are actually they're pretty varied. I have improved a lot since my first term. I've been trying different kind of methods. And right now what I'm doing is the Pomodoro method where you study for 25 30 minutes and then you have a 5 minute break in between and you do that for 4 sets. I feel like that really helps for me because I have a really short attention span. So when I am only studying for like 30 minutes at a time, I'm actually able to like retain more of the study that I'm doing. And that little break time is very helpful for me, basically. For me, I feel like my Pomodoro method actually really helps with burnout because since you're learning for 30 minutes at a time with 5 minute breaks in between, it's really easy to not actually have burnout because you're studying one bit at a time and you're not actually doing a whole bunch at once. I feel like that's really helpful for me because one thing that I really wanted to avoid was burnout because I see how all my friends experience burnout, especially during HSC, and that was really scary for me because it was very daunting, especially during HSC. So for me, something that I really wanted to avoid was burnout, and I feel like the Pomodoro method really helps with that. When it comes to actual note taking, I find that I do it based on the syllabus notes. So I take down the syllabus notes and I go back to the lecture notes and the readings that they offer, and I answer each of the syllabus points as like a question, basically. And I feel like that really helps me get a fuller understanding of what I'm actually learning. And yeah, I feel like it's really been very helpful, especially in this year, because in my first year, I did not do that. And I can definitely see the difference in my learning. I think effective note taking has really impacted the way I learn just by how much more knowledge I can retain. I think in my first year, I didn't actually remember, I don't remember most of it, to be honest. I don't remember most of the things that I learnt because I was just writing down everything from the lecture notes and the slides. And I feel like it didn't really help me learn anything, especially when it came to exams and things like that. So for me, after I found the Pomodoro method and active recall and study methods like that, it really helped me retain more knowledge and it helps with my exams, my assignments, and yeah, I feel like it's really worth putting the effort in to actually be more effective at note taking. I think for incoming students to find note taking skills that really help them, I think for them, they should do a lot of trial and error. Try all the different ones that you can find and find the one that really works for you, basically. That's what I did. I didn't do that in my first year. I just went with what I did during HSC, during lockdown, and it did not work out well for me. So after I put the time in and I did the trial and error, I did find strategies that did work for me. And I feel like it's really worth the effort to put in.
So comparing high school and university and how I used to take notes, I think definitely the first difference is that I used to, take handwritten notes in high school. I've definitely changed to a laptop since I came to university, and I think you probably see a lot of people doing that as well. That just makes it a little easier for me to compile my notes and sort of get them down really quickly. I also think that I've sort of been very strategic with my notes. In high school, I used to just write down what was written on the board and not really absorb what I was writing down. I think here at university, I definitely take a lot of notes in lectures, and so I'm sort of listening for those key words and those things that my lecturer really emphasizes, and I know to note that down or hear what they want questions to be asked about. And so that's how I've been really strategic. I also think in terms of note taking, I used to just take notes in class in high school, whereas I take them in class, but also I have to do a lot of pre-readings for my degree, and so I'm taking a lot of notes there, highlighting what I want to, ask questions about, sort of clarify, and that really helps as well, and that's how I've kind of evolved my note-taking. For my arts degree, I think it's very similar to maybe high school. I'm sort of typing down those key things, and I'm definitely hearing what my lecturer is saying and really emphasizing those points that they're emphasizing as well. For law, I've definitely got some new strategies of a lot of the things that we do in law are case related, so like law cases. And so I've got, tables, and they really help me kind of clarify what sort of things I need to know and how the case sort of went out chronologically. That is really great for me. I also really love flowcharts. That was something that I loved in high school, and I love drawing them, and now I'm like drawing them in university as well. I think that helps, make the note-taking fun, but also helps you solidify your knowledge. I think note-taking in university is really great because it means that you have more autonomy on how you learn and how you're going to take those notes. Some people like a lot of text, and some people like me really like flowcharts. So you really get to choose at university how you want to take those notes. For my law degree, these note-taking strategies have been really helpful because specifically for my degree, it's great to know, the main facts of a case so that you can apply them in your exams or to answer a problem question or something like that. And so having them on a table, you've got your questions that you want to ask, and it's all there for you. I feel like it's very methodological. It's makes it really easy. And similarly to flowcharts, you can just ask yourself a question and sort of go down the flowchart accordingly. And that's really good for law specifically because a lot of law is reading legislation and sort of working out what steps you need to take from there. It's really great to just trial and error. You have your first few years of your degree for a reason, and so you can work out what has worked for you in an exam. I think it's exciting that you get to try new things. You can also, when you're doing group study sessions or connecting with your peers, you can say hey, what's been working for you, or what do you like? And I've definitely picked up a lot from my peers. I didn't come up with the table method myself, and so it's been really great to get other people's perspectives and opinions and what works for them and what makes it the easiest for them as well.
For me, note taking is probably the most useful when I'm preparing for exams. Exams are when they need you to go and essentially spit out a lot of theory because, of course, they don't have the full luxury of an entire term to go and test what you've actually go and learned. So it's being able to go and have very concise knowledge of how something is done that you can essentially go and write down and go and share to your markers. For note-taking styles, I actually found myself really inspired by a lot of the programming that I actually do. I think the biggest technique that I'd love to go and share is that you should always be indenting all of your kind of paragraphs, all of your chunks of knowledge. Sometimes I see people just go and write down lines and lines and lines of all of this kind of theory and stuff that they want to go and remember and take notes on, and it just becomes like a huge block of unreadable mess. When you're like constantly indenting so that one bit of like more refined information and more details are kind of set inside the paragraph, it becomes so much more easy to go and look at because now you can just go and focus in on the detailed aspects when you need to go and find them. I think the easiest way to go and find the kind of note-taking technique that works best for you is to go and experiment. You need to really go through this kind of idea and process of trying a whole lot of different things until you go and find something that actually works for you.
Note taking is a very foundational part of a commerce and law degree, especially for the law part, because there's so many readings, so much content to get through, and it definitely helps if you're on top of your notes in the long run for your final exam when you're doing revision. So my strategy for the commerce part of my degree is to write notes in the lecture slides of what the lecturer talks about so that I'm not repeating the notes that I already have from the slides. And then it just helps to pay attention to what is being said instead of what is being written, because you can always read over what you have in the lecture slides. I take notes throughout the whole term. I have one master document with, sometimes it goes over 100 pages, depending on the type of content we have. I take notes from lectures, from readings, from tutorials, and I separate it based on the weeks. And then when it comes to my final exam, I make a revision note sheet, and then it's definitely shorter. It's about 20 to 30 pages, and it's easier to flick through during exam and during revision time. There's a lot to get through in a whole term with when you do 3 courses, for example. Having lecture notes, they're definitely helpful, but it's not good to rely specifically on them. Having your own notes in your own words in a way that you can understand them helps you when it comes time for revising those notes for exams. When I was in my first year, I remember having like a 200-page document, but I would have repeated dot points, and then I just confuse myself. I'd get frustrated. But now I have shorter documents, notes are in my own words, and I understand what I have written and what I have learnt better. So definitely don't just write everything, even if it seems super important.
There's a lot of information being delivered to you all at once. So being able to effectively understand and write down the most important bits in a way you understand yourself is super important in your learning process. So the biggest difference I would say between note-taking in high school and university is definitely the amount of note-taking you have to take yourself. So in high school, I found that a lot of times for me, I would have notes given to me already. They're already prepared by either teachers or any other resources, and I'm able to readily access them myself. But transitioning to university, the information isn't available in the most readily or readable source. So it's really up to you to properly interpret the information yourself in a way you understand. So for me, a technique I like to use is preview, view, and review, where preview is consisting of looking at the content and lecture slides beforehand and really formulating a specific goal or objective in mind in what I want to learn or what I want to achieve, and writing out what potential questions I might have. And the view stage is when you actually attend the lecture or the class in person, have all your questions answered, and develop a more fundamental understanding of the content. And lastly, there's review, where you fully master your understanding, where you answer questions or go to the lecture before or after the class to get your additional questions answered. For me, note-taking occurs throughout my entire study process, right? Whether it be for lectures, tutorials, for exam preparation, I'm always writing down my thoughts and notes to make sure I can use it again in the future, because who knows, maybe the smallest thought or detail you might have might come up in an exam, and you don't want to regret not having writing it down so you can't recall it later in the future. So for note-taking, finding a method or technique that best suits you is definitely up to trial and error. That's what I believe. So going from first year to third year, I definitely went through my fair share of note taking, whether it be having a friend help me, so having a bunch of friends collaborate on the same document and cluster it all together. That definitely helped with time management, but a big difference for me, or a big challenge for me to overcome with that type of technique, was that my understanding of the content would not always be the same as the understanding of my peers. So even though we're saving time, we're just breaking down the notes together, I might have to find myself taking even more time to interpret what other people are thinking. So that sort of links back to independent learning, where your own understanding is really the best understanding you can have.